Welcome back, Painting One students. We just finished up our color wheel, or we're almost done with that, and we're going to use that information to go to our next project, which involves color theory, the basis of which is that color wheel that we just created. So I'm not going to read all the directions to you. Obviously, that's something that you're expected to do on your own. I don't have it on my version, but there's a little immersive reader icon. It's like a purple icon that if you click that, it'll read it to you if you're having trouble understanding the directions too. But like always, after you read the directions, you want to check out all the resources before you begin the project. So there's a video you're to watch. We'll look at this Quizlet here in a second, which is going to help you review some color theory information before you start your painting. But this one handout's super important. It's called Color Theory Visuals. Now, I'm not going to go over every single thing about this, but it should look kind of familiar to what you just created in Paint. But we're starting, you started with the primary colors, which were the yellow, red, and blue, and from there you were able to mix all these other colors. So when you mix your two primaries together, you get a secondary, so like orange, green, and violet. If you add a little bit more of that primary, you get the tertiary color, which is the in between the primary and the secondary. So yellow, orange would be an example of that, yellow, green. And then we also talked about different versions of each color. So with our color wheel, we mix tints and shades. So this is a tint of yellow. We mix white and yellow together to get that, black and yellow to get the shade. The one thing we didn't do on ours, but is on this wheel, is a circle that is called the tones. And so that's when you mix a color with gray, okay, which is easy enough, and you can certainly do that. We're going to learn more about what these things in the middle mean. These are indicators that help us figure out a color scheme. So let's go down to the next. This is just a little review too. You can check out, when you add white, gray, or black to a color, if the pure color is yellow, these are examples of the tint, tone, and shade of that color. This is probably, I think, my favorite handout. Maybe make it a little bigger here. It really simplifies what we've been talking about, and I think hopefully you'll understand this even better. I know all color wheels look very different. So the basic idea that the primaries are still here, secondaries are still here, and the tertiaries are the colors in between. But what I really want to draw your attention to, because that's down here as well for you, is the types of color schemes. So for this next project, you're going to have to use at least one color scheme. If you're at home, your option is there's a piece of illustration board in the package that I gave to you, and it says, I believe, color theory or color scheme project on the back of it. So you could use that. Those folks that are hybrid that are going to be with me, we're going to be using those laptop boxes and painting on top of those. If you want to get in on the action, though, if you're a remote student, if you want to paint a box instead of that illustration board, you can use any shoe box or any box you have lying around at home to do that. What I'm having the kids do in school, though, is to give a nice white primer coat over the whole thing before they start their sketch of their design on top of it. But one of the things that you're going to have to choose before we start the actual painting of it is what color scheme you're going to want to paint the thing in, okay? So here are some different ones to choose from, and you'll be looking at more of these with the Quizlet. But a monochromatic is probably your simplest color scheme. That's when you pick one color and you just do what we did on the color wheel. You have some versions that are lighter with white, some versions that are darker with black, and maybe some in-betweens that are a mix of gray with your color and just the saturated color, and you use that throughout your piece. Now, if you choose one of these color schemes, it doesn't mean you can't break the rules a little bit. Like, I can make the entire background monochromatic red, different shades of red, different tints of red, different tones of red. And then if I wanted to create a focal point that was the complement of red, that would be the opposite of red, and I have like one little thing on the side of the piece that was green just to have it stand out, that's fine. And so what that means is that I'm kind of utilizing two color schemes. So often artists will use more than one color scheme in a work, or they'll start with a color scheme and then they'll create a little variety within that color scheme. So don't feel like you've got to follow each color scheme to the purest extent. You can start with it, and if you branch off from it from there, that's fine. So split complementary, we talked about complementary, those are opposites. A split complementary is if you pick a base color and then instead of its opposite, you pick the two beside it. So This triangular relationship would be an example of a split complementary relationship. A triad is when you create an equilateral triangle relationship. So secondary colors and primary colors are triadic, but you could also do a triad with tertiary colors as well. Okay. A tetrad is when you pick four colors and they create a rectangle or a square, and these are two sets of opposites, two sets of complementary colors together. So tetrad is actually one of my favorite color schemes, and I'll show you an example of a tetrad painting I saw a little later that might help you understand this better. Okay, and then analogous is when you take colors that are just right next to each other on the color wheel, and that is its own color scheme. So if I said, you know what, I'm gonna have red, and I'm gonna have some crimsons, and I'm gonna have some violets, I'm gonna have some indigos together in my artwork, they're all kind of staying together on one side of the color wheel. That would be an analogous color scheme. Okay, so this is a very helpful illustration. Look through it, read it, try to understand it, and there's more resources as we go here. So I'll go ahead and zoom out on this. Okay, and this is similar, except it's maybe a little easier to understand. Um, these two, a lot of times people just call these both tetrads, so rectangle or square relationship. This is that split complementary that I was talking about that creates an acute triangular relationship. Triadic creates an equilateral triangle relationship. Analogous are those colors on one part of the color wheel together, and complementary colors are opposites. Okay, so hopefully that helps you understand color schemes and color theories a little better, and you can see that's what all of these mean too. So, that helps you figure out what a split complementary or what a complementary is, and so on. Okay, so I'm going to close that. Now, what's going to be really helpful too is to maybe see some examples of what past students have done, or just some other examples of color schemes that'll help you understand it. So these are the assignments from last year. These are some students that did these last year, and I'm not going to go through each color scheme that they chose, but they're like, this one is monochromatic for the most part, but then they threw in a complement in there too. So you can see how they maybe started with a color scheme and then branched off from this was mainly primary, this was mainly primary, this was mainly complementary, but instead of a bright orange and a bright blue, it was a tint of blue and a tone of orange. And so this is where you get a little creative with the variety that you want to include to make it your own. Okay, and then this was kind of an interesting one here. This is somebody else's artwork, if I can zoom out. Okay, and so this is an example of a tetrad color scheme. Okay, and this is not mine, this is one I found online. I thought illustrated it very well. But a tetrad is when you have that relationship of four colors that create a rectangle, and they're two sets of complements. So like red and green are opposites on the color wheel, so that's one set of complements, and blue and orange are also opposite on the color wheel. And so you can see how this artist used a tetradic or a tetrad color scheme to create that relationship, and it's very vibrant. Now, what they could have done is they could have used, they used in the background some dull reds, some tones that were mixed with gray, and some shades that are mixed with black to make those things look like they recede into the background, and then the brighter, more saturated colors seem like they're popping out at us. Okay, so that was a technique that they decided to do, but at least that shows you one design idea of how they took that color scheme idea and ran with it. Okay, so this is not graded, but we are going to eventually have a quiz on all this vocabulary that I'm going over, and this is going to help you with that. Now, if you're not signed up for Quizlet, it is free, and to use this, the whole thing, it'll let you, I think, use like 9 of the flashcards, but it won't let you see like the other 7 unless you sign up. So it's free. If you don't already have an account, I would highly recommend that you do that. But in any case, so what you do is if it says like warm colors, you click on it and it'll give you that answer. Okay, red, orange, and yellow are warm colors. Great, there's some vocabulary. Cool colors, blue, green, violet. Okay, this is pretty basic. Okay, monochromatic color scheme, we talked about variations of a single color. So, a tint, a shade, a tone of blue If I just pretty much use these colors, that would be a monochromatic color scheme. An analogous color scheme, like we talked about, is colors that are on one part of the color wheel that are near each other. Complements are direct opposites. Okay. Triadic color scheme has an equilateral triangle, and you can just spin that. So, this would be a triad, this would be a triad. Okay. A tetrad would be a rectangular combination. We just talked about that with that example of the guy with the hat. A split complementary would be, instead of having a complement, you have the opposite of the base. You'd have the two that are staggering that, so it creates an acute triangular relationship. That is called a split complementary. Now, another vocab word we're going to talk about is intensity or saturation. That's how bright or dull a color is. And there are different ways to desaturate or make a color more dull, and that's explained in here if you want to look over that. Primary colors we talked about, pretty basic. Secondary. Okay, so you can see how this is a really helpful tool to get this information and to help you remember all these things. Value is how light or dark a color is by mixing more white or black. Tint is any color plus white. Shade is any color plus black. Tone is any color plus gray. And that is it. So those are the basics of what you're responsible for in terms of vocabulary, but that's not nearly as important as the project itself, okay? So I think what I get most out of this when I'm looking at all this is, the main thing is that you have a good design, and you can tell how different these all are. So they came up with their designs. You're going to do a sketch first in your sketchbook, come up with a good idea. And if it's a box, you're going to have two sides to it, and you're going to choose at least one color scheme, but I would prefer that you do two if you're doing it on a box. And you've got a couple weeks to do this. And it is going to be expected that you do some of this at home too. It's not just going to be done in the classroom. So you want to start thinking out your design for this, and you're going to be staring at this thing all semester. So you might as well make it good. And this is, as important as the color wheel is, this is our first actual original piece of art that you're making. So this is where you make your best first impression. All right. So I wish you the best of luck, and make sure you read over everything and look at the rubric.